Alright guys, welcome back to another MCreator tutorial. So today what we're going to be looking at is sync data and how to use that. So we're going to be looking into entities first. I have a basic entity created just called Golden Cube. The properties really won't matter too much for what you're actually setting because we just focused on the sync data part, which is under this tab here. When you're working with sync data, what it's going to do is it's going to synchronize it between client and server. So something that MBT doesn't actually support. So MBT is usually on server side only. So when you're working with the sync data, what it's going to do is it will allow both the basically the actual data for the variable that you assign to be both on client and server. So things like this, like animations, it's going to be really useful because you'll be able to synchronize the animation between all players, so both on server as well as client. For example, the client side or animations are on client side when you're actually setting your playback condition. So when you're using sync data, this is really a useful thing to toggle the sync data to make sure that the animation is playing for all the correct players nearby and stuff like that. So we don't actually need this. I'm going to remove that. I think that was causing an issue with what I was testing. So let's go ahead and create a sync data. So we are presented with a window here. It's called new data entry. And our entry name is going to be basically the name which our variable is stored. The bottom here, the type, is either integer, which is a solid number. It does not support decimal points. We can work around that using division. I'll get into that in a little bit. There is logic, which is our true or false, and then there is strings. So if we want to store any of these values, we need to basically select a name and then choose a value here. We'll be working with numbers today because I said we were going to store variables, so or decimal points. So let's go ahead and just call this one, we'll call it 1 or main. And this will be our solid number. So we can call it main here, and then our sub will be our sub integer. So this will be the decimal point one. And we're just going to leave the default values at 0 for now. And when we go into our triggers here, I have a basic trigger set up for when the entity spawns. So this will allow us to basically set some things. Now by default, when you create your sync data, you're going to have to save because it doesn't automatically load. So if we go ahead right now before saving and go to actions and then scroll down all the way to the bottom here, we can click on this and click on the other one, but we're not going to have any entries, like any data from the entry list. So what we have to do is we have to save the entity before we can actually manipulate the variables. So let's go ahead and save that. We'll go back into our procedure and we'll go to actions, and we're going to set our sync data. If I can get onto that scroll bar there, a little hard to see there. So we're going to select our entity. Now the only problem with the sync data that I have an issue with is we can't really use this between other mods. So there is no way to use a text field or anything like that, like we're used to with actual data, like MBT data and stuff like that. So that's really the only downside of these blocks, is we don't have full control over the names or registries of entities or the properties or anything like that. So it's very designed for your own mod only. So we're going to set our decimal or our sub, which is going to be our decimal, to 5. And what we're going to do for the other one, our main, is we're also going to have it at 5. So basically what we're doing here is we have our two integers, which are two solid numbers, right? And we want to divide our sub by a certain amount to get a decimal point. So before we do anything, let's go ahead and pass these over to local variables. So when we're working with it, we know that it's going to be, we can reuse it in our script and stuff like that. So let's go ahead and call this one, we'll call it des for decimal, and this should be a number. And we also want, we'll call it prime for our primary number. So these are going to be our two values, and we can go ahead and grab our values for our local variables from the custom variables one, and we're going to grab that and set our primary. We need to get the primary variable from way at the bottom here. Like MBT, we also have the values under data and actions. Actions are for setting, data is for getting values. So once we've set it, what I want to do is I want to select our primary number, and I want to do that for our decimal number as well. So once we've done that for both of those, what we can do is we can create another variable. We're going to call this total, and we're going to save that as a number variable here. And then what we can do is we can start manipulating those variables a little bit. So let's go ahead and set our total here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to use a couple math blocks to combine and divide our decimal one. So let's talk about dividing and basically how we can get different types of decimal points. So when you're working with integers, obviously if you have multiple numbers like a value of 2 digits, so say a 10 or 12 or something like that, you want to divide that number by 100 because that's going to move the decimal point over 2 digits. So if you're just working with one number like we are with the 5 here, then we just need to divide that by 10. If you're working with 3, then what you need to do is divide that by 1,000. So it just keeps climbing up the more zeros that you need to divide per decimal point. So for example, with this one, what we're just going to do is we're going to divide that by 10. So divide by 10, and then we're going to select our decimal one. We're going to put that in here. And then we're going to set our primary, and that's going to be our total. So basically what we're doing is we're taking the decimal, we're getting, or the value for the decimal, and we're dividing that by 10 to get 0.5. And then we're combining our primary with our 0.5 to get 5.5. So after we've done that, I didn't cover in the last video for entity MBT, so we're going to take a look at that in just a second. We're going to set this to value, and we're going to set our total to this value. So basically what we should get for our entity MBT is 5.5 when we actually get the total script working. So to summarize, these are our variables that we're basically setting for our sync data. We're then getting the sync data and applying it to local variables so we can use decimal points. And then we're combining the primary and decimal points, but then dividing it by 10 to get our single digit decimal. If we wanted with more than one decimal, like point, so 0.10 or 0.05 or something like that, then what we can do is we can divide this by 100. If we want 3 decimal points, like 0.005, then we would divide that by 1,000. And then finally, what we're doing is we're basically applying that value over, or our total, to our value MBT. So we'll be looking at this in-game next. All right, so we'll go to a little bit of an area that's a little bit more flat or clear, I guess. There's a village over there, so that will be good enough. So what I have is that entity, and we got the sync data. So as soon as we spawn in a entity, what we can do is we'll be able to get the data from the entity itself. So let's go ahead and spawn that in. We're going to go ahead and set data and then get, and then what we want is entity, and we're going to copy that, and then we have to locate the entity and stare at it. So staring at the entity, if we can get it to stay still. It's a little bit tricky. So then we have the entity UUID. So once we've done that, what we can do is we can just go ahead and get the data. So there is going to be a couple values in here that are custom when we spawn this in. So a lot of this is mostly the Minecraft values. There are a couple like our data main, which is our sync data one. This is in our root basic data folder. So if we follow this all the way through here, this is going to be in our root one. This is the sync data. So if you needed a test for it, you would basically do something like get and then the sync data value. So basically data and main, and this should get the value that we can get. So we can use that in commands later on if we really wanted to. The other one we have is the data sub. So data, this should be a capital DD. So data sub, and we also have a 5 for that one. So when we want to get the value for MBT, because I didn't cover it in the last video for MBT variables, you can also find the variable MBT variables under this tab as well. That's why we're using MBT to actually store the value to kind of get the idea for the sync data. So if we go under here, you can see that the entity has NeoForge data. This tag here will be basically dependent on the version that you're working on. If you're on Forge, then it will only be Forge data, not NeoForge data. And then we have our value here, which is our number, and that is set to 5.5. So let's go ahead and just get the command for that. So we would go NeoForge or Forge data, and then we would use the same format that we're basically using there. So colon, and then our data type. And then what we do is we'll check for value. And I think that might not work that way. So we would do dot value, and that should get our value that we have here. So in this case, we have golden cube has a following entry or entity. Following entity has data 5.5. So basically, if we look at here, we have our value 5.5. So this is correct. So that's basically the MBT values, how to get the values and stuff like that. You can also set the values if you wanted to by doing, rather than get, we would do merge, or yeah, merge, and then we would do NeoForge data, and then we would do something like, in these two brackets here, we'd do NeoForge data, colon, and then our value equals, and I think it's equals, no, it's colon, and then we do like 6.5. And then we have a D at the end for decimal, so that should be set. And if we go ahead and run our other command to get the value, it's 6.5 now. For the sync data, we can do this as well. I think I haven't ever tried, so we do something like data main, and we'll see if this works. So 5, we'll try 6. And it does say it was set, so we can go ahead and try to get the value main, or data main, and it is set to 6. So you can set and basically apply the data through commands if you really wanted to. If you wanted to bypass the sync data for the variable blocks in MBT, I don't know why they're not using some sort of text-based system that would basically support modding for cross-mod compatibility more. It doesn't really make sense to me why it wouldn't be set up that way, but sometimes it's just easier, I guess, for them to not do that, or maybe there is an actual reason, but I'm not entirely sure why they wouldn't. So, But other than that, hopefully you found this video helpful. If you're new to my channel, don't forget to subscribe, comment down below, rate the video, and I will see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching. Peace out.